Radio Espial is a series of podcasts brought to you across the internet by TIPM Media. Presented by investigative journalist Mick Rooney, it covers a host of topics from international media, publishing, aviation, and technology. Thank you for listening to this podcast today.
It's great to be back. It's 2020 and episode 12. Tell you about our guests very shortly. It's good to be back. We've a great guest coming up. He's Captain and Pilot Michael Glynn, and we'll be talking aviation and an update on the case of MH370.
Explore and discover together.
Here we are again. Radio Espial is a global internet broadcast and in audio and video. Our focus is on media and how it deals with news. Our core areas are publishing, aviation, technology, and we consider all other things. And it's great to be back in this year, 2020. Yeah, we had something of a bit of a layoff. I think it must be last spring was our last broadcast. So great to be back. Let me get straight into it. Aviation and news on MH370 this evening. Let me tell you about our guest tonight. He's Michael Glynn, a former Qantas pilot and captain. He lives in Sydney, 60 years old. He joined the Royal Australian Air Force at the age of 19 after training. He flew the Caribou Tactical Transport for the majority of his time there. He joined Qantas in 1987 as the second officer on the 747 Classic. After 2 years, he became a first officer on the 767 and then a first officer on the 747-400. He checked out as a 767 captain after slightly less than 10 years with Qantas. Eventually, he flew the Airbus 330 for 11 years and finished up in the 747-400. He was active on the Qantas Pilots Association, becoming vice president in 2006, and a work and healthy safety rep for 10 years. He was also had a post in as a maintenance test pilot on the 747. He's the owner of a former Chinese Army Air Force basic trainer aircraft known as the Chanchuk C-36A, and he uses that in a formatic acrobatic flying team. They are also called the Russian Roulettes. Very intriguing. He's been an active debunker on Metabunk, dealing predominantly with such conspiracies as chemtrails, 9/11 conspiracies, and other such things like flat earthers. We won't be going there this evening. He retired with a little over 20,000 hours service, 12,000 of them on heavy Boeing aircraft. So, without much further ado, let's go and talk to Michael.
Okay, you're welcome back to Radio Espial, and we're joined by my guest, Michael Glynn. Michael, you're very welcome.
Thanks very much, mate. Glad to be here.
I'm delighted to have you, and you're kind of the first guest we have for the new season, 2020.
Oh, good.
I hope your 2020 has went well. Is life a little bit quieter since retirement, or are you busying yourself with other projects?
It's definitely different. I'm enjoying getting a full night's sleep each night, and
and no strange hours.
I know. So I know that's been the best thing, really. And I'm currently writing a book, so based on my opinions on Malaysia 370.
Right.
So
we'll talk a little bit about that during the interview, maybe towards the end. Well, if people didn't listen to my initial biography of you, Michael, obviously you're a retired captain, formerly in Qantas in Australia. Just before we get directly into your career and what took you there, just early life, where were you born? Was aviation always a thing as a young kid? What's the background?
Yeah, it was. I was number 2 of a 9-child family. Wow. So, yeah, good Catholic family, Irish Catholic. So to that. Dad was in the armed forces, so I moved around a lot. I went to attended about 5 different school systems and about 11 schools in all, and decided very early that I was going to be a pilot. I was growing up when the United States space program was beginning to hit its straps, and I was fascinated by it. And I decided probably about age 5 I was going to be an astronaut, and my older brother gleefully informed me that Australia didn't have any astronauts. So I can remember making the decision when I was about 5, maximum 6, that I was going to be a pilot. And that was it, as far as I was concerned. There was nothing else that I wanted to do. So I've had a lifelong interest in flying. I had an uncle who was in the Australian Air Force, flying Hercules, and didn't get to see much of him, but he was a bit of an inspiration to me, and I was lucky enough eventually to join the Royal Australian Air Force.
And when after the Air Force, then when did you move into commercial aviation?
I had 7 years in the Air Force, and I was fortunate to have everything that Qantas required at a time when they were recruiting a lot of pilots. This was in 1987, and I was fortunate to be selected to become a pilot with them. And started in 1987. I was became a second officer on the what's called the 747 Classic, which is the first what they call steam-driven model, the one that had all the basic instruments that they had back in the 50s and 60s. Carried a flight engineer. It was the first aircraft that I flew that had an autopilot, a weather radar, a flight engineer, all that sort of stuff, and got introduced to the whole culture of long-haul airline flying. Qantas has the longest air routes in the world, average trip length, so it was all based around long-haul flying at that stage. And so I spent a couple of years as a second officer, which is pretty much a relief pilot. You don't get to take off and land. You sit in the seat when either the captain, the first officer, or the flight engineer was having a break and operating the aircraft and occasionally getting to fly, but it was a pretty basic operation. And after 3 years of doing that, or in fact not even that, I became a first officer on the 767, which is, in my opinion, was a much nicer aircraft and a better role. I got to take off and land, and enjoyed that aircraft immensely. And then, as I said, the airline was expanding rapidly. We were getting the new 747-400s. Slot opened up as a first officer on that, which is pretty much an extension of the 767 cockpit, but modernised to a...
And no flight engineer then?
No flight engineer, no. It was a two-pilot operation, and I spent 5 years doing that, and mainly flying to Europe, occasionally to the US and Japan maybe. And then a command opened up on the 767. So I was very fortunate again, joined the right place at the right time, and was fortunate enough to check out as a captain with Qantas just under 10 years from joining, which they don't do now, I'll tell you that much. So back to the 767, wonderful aircraft, my first love, really. And did 8 years as a captain there. Then Qantas bought the Airbus A330, which I'd always been intrigued by. Went and did a conversion on that in Hong Kong and had 11 years on that. Really enjoyed that as well, but probably preferred the Boeings to the Airbus. And then a slot came up on the 747 as a captain, which was a lifelong ambition of mine. And that's where I did the last 3 years before I retired. I had my last flight in Qantas a year ago today. So I was,
excellent. Well, how appropriate.
Yes, I didn't know it was my last flight at the time, but I had went to get a medical checkup and the problem was there, so I took a medical retirement, but I'm feeling much better now.
Excellent. Good to hear that. Just generally, before we get into our main subject of Malaysia Airlines MH370, I just wanted to generally talk about the industry, the aviation industry as you see it now, but specifically, I suppose, for younger people wanting to move into the industry. My perception is, particularly in the last 10 years, one, there's a huge demand for pilots now, in a way that perhaps before then there wasn't as much. It was harder to get into. It's a little bit easier to get into now. So yes. Just talk a little bit to me about the avenues. Obviously, the avenue you came from to get into commercial aviation was through the RAF. Some airlines I know do cadet programs. Other airlines, perhaps like a lot more budget airlines, they tend to want you to have to, pay and do your own training first before you really get to the entry level. Just talk to me a little bit about, the landscape, as it were, for young people coming into the industry.
Well, it has changed. The pool of available pilots has dropped. There are also a lot of young men and women decide it's the lifestyle requirements of the job is a bit not family friendly, not a balanced lifestyle. There's a lot of divorces amongst pilots simply because of the demands of the life. But to start off, it hasn't really changed that much, except, as you say, the introduction of pay to play, I actually call it, which didn't exist when I first joined. These cadetships have come in, and they're quite expensive, and unfortunately, due to some of the conditions that existed 10, 15 years ago, pay for pilots has probably not kept up with inflation. So it's a big decision. If you're deciding to be a pilot these days, it's a big commitment. You have to either commit yourself to minimum of 10 years in in Australia, minimum 10 years return of service in the Australian Air Force, and that's pretty much the same the world around, or a big financial outlay.
Mm-hmm.
So what that does tend to do is it tends to weed out those who think it may be a good idea or looks cool or something like that. You have to really want to do it.
Yeah.
And for those who do it, the avenues are there. Qantas is going through another recruiting phase simply because people like me are retiring, and they're also getting new aircraft. Other airlines are doing the same thing. Coronavirus may knock that around, but history shows that these are usually blips, and the demand for air travel comes back pretty quickly once the threat of a virus or something like that is over. Even after the GFC, there was a huge drop in air traffic, but the demand comes back pretty quickly. So there will be opportunities there for young people deciding if they want to do it, but they have to really want to do it because there's no easy way to do it.
How do you see the future? How, I suppose, personnel-wise, how we're progressing, and also technology-wise, how is the industry going? We'll probably even touch on some of these points when we talk more about MH370. I suppose we're particularly in the area of tracking aircraft. So just generally a broad window of...
Yeah, the things that have changed in my time was the introduction of satellite communications, data links and voice communications. GPS, that has radically changed the way air traffic control works and the sort of approaches that you can do. The CRM, which is crew resource management. When I first joined, we were at the tail end of people that maybe had been pilots during wartime and were used to getting their own way in all things, and that actually caused a few accidents. One of the most notable ones of those was the Tenerife accident of the two 747s, pretty much caused by the captain of the KLM being the sort of person who wouldn't take no for an answer, and
very demonstrative personality.
Yeah. Yes, he was. He was a very strong personality. I do find it interesting to note that when KLM first learned of the accident, the very first person they turned to be a representative at the accident investigation was that captain. They didn't know he was the actual captain.
Right.
He was the head of their training section. He was quite a high up in their hierarchy, but his attitude and his lack of awareness about what was going on with him and his lack of ability to ask for help directly led to that accident. And these days, very much a focus on a crew. You have expertise if you're a captain, you have expertise in the right-hand seat. The first officers generally know what they're doing. If you carry a second officer, they can be very experienced, and the whole ethos these days is to tell your crew members if they see something, speak up, because everyone can have a bad day, and that's a big thing. That's one of the reasons why the safety statistics have improved so much since even when I joined. That they used to be pretty dire, say 50s and 60s. Gradual improvement from then on, due to these sorts of improvements. Say the SATCOM and GPS are huge things. CRM, I would think, would be the
most important,
probably
one
the
that's
biggest
changed.
one. Yeah.
As we move now to our main subject, MH370. I guess obviously this is more for the benefit of people who haven't maybe necessarily listened to all our previous podcasts on this subject. So maybe we should just generally bring people broadly up to date as to where we are. So I mean, we're astonishingly 6 years on since March the 8th, 2014. So just generally, if you could just give us a broad summary of where we are now with the case of MH370.
Well, it would be nice to say they'd found the aircraft and all that, and that's the problem. We know something happened. We know it was probably something that had never happened before, or certainly in the way that it happened. It's a bit of a black swan, if you use that term, in that it's never really. There have been cases, of course. I'm an adherent of the belief that the perpetrator was one of the pilots. That has happened before. It's not necessarily so. I just think that's the most probable cause. But we've reached an impasse, I guess, about a year ago when the Ocean Infinity search stopped. There's no more new information, really. There's work being done by independent groups, which we'll touch on later, which may define new search areas. But after, as you say, it's almost 6 years now. It's amazing that we just don't know what actually happened. We have no definitive idea of exactly what occurred, and that's why I think there needs to be a look at a new search and new search areas to find.
And I guess as well, the feeling, and I suppose this is in particular since the disappointment of the 2017, 2018 search by Ocean Infinity.
Yes.
I get that increasing feeling that the Malaysia authorities, having effectively wound up the Annex 13 safety investigation team, I get this increasing impression that there's a deep reluctance now for the Malaysian authorities to revisit the case. It almost sense that for them it's done unless somebody, this phrase they keep using, legal phrase, unless somebody can come up with credible evidence that leads more precisely to where the aircraft is, then there's not much point in undergoing a second search, and that's despite a no fine, no fee contract.
Yes, I agree 100%. I get the distinct impression they'd like to rule a line under the whole episode. You can read into that what you will. It's maybe a cultural thing, but I get the impression the whole episode was an embarrassment to the company and to the country and to the airline itself, which are intertwined, as you know. And they would rather the attention die down. Unfortunately, that maybe have the opposite effect, maybe the Streisand effect here. The more you try to keep it hidden, the more intrigued people will be, and they have a right to be. As you say, it's been 6 years, and this is unprecedented that we still cannot find that aircraft, or more importantly, the digital flight recorder. And the cockpit voice recorder. I think they will, from a autopilot point of view, will only fly a straight line. This is one of the things I've been putting a lot of work into. So if it's found pretty much where they were looking, the only really way it could get there was flying in the LNAV mode, which you need to know how to work, which is another indication that it may have been a deliberate act. So it'll tell us that sort of stuff. But the digital flight recorder would be the jewel in the crown of things to find. The cockpit voice recorder probably would not say much and may be able to...
There is a question mark on that, isn't there? And we've discussed this many times online, and I should just make people aware that we've known each other now for probably a good year or more.
Yeah.
The cockpit voice recorder is an interesting thing because obviously, first of all, the most important thing to say to people is, and they say, well, why would one data recorder be more important than a cockpit voice recorder? Surely you'll know exactly what was going on. But of course, one must remember that the cockpit voice recorder works generally with commercial aircraft on a 2-hour loop.
Yes.
So once it completes its first 2 hours, it loops back, tapes back over the previous 2 hours.
That's correct.
So you're limited in what you can get if you're dealing with a flight that's 7.5 hours plus.
Yes, and if
you're not,
that's
yeah.
And if there was no one flying the aircraft at the end, it's not going to tell you a thing, apart from there was no one flying the aircraft.
And apart from we might get some of the ambient noise.
Yes.
And that, of course, is if, and it remains a big if, that something either accidental, technical, or worse, nefarious, did not disengage the autopilot, that something wasn't tripped out to switch it off. So essentially, there is no further recording. Although I sometimes think perhaps if that did occur, we might actually know more because we will have a 2-hour loop of an earlier period in the flight, which might actually be more important.
Yeah, I think as I said, I think the DFR, the DFDR, sorry, digital flight data, with the number of parameters that it records, and I think that's got about a 25-hour recording time. That will tell you much more. I believe that will tell you what modes we use, what if the turns were done manually or in an autopilot. That will tell you a huge amount, and it would also tell you if there was a major malfunction of the aircraft that actually caused the sequence of events that caused it to disappear. So the cockpit voice recorder would be nice. It would be, but the DFDR would be, as I say, the jewel in the crown. That's where you would get most of your information from.
About and I've never put this into the public arena, but about 2 years ago, well, let me just put it this way: I was passed a document into my hands. That came from the official investigation team, and this followed a meeting with, that we'll just call it, partners involved, and this effectively outlined and costed essentially the recovery plan. The recovery plan meaning this is what happens when and if and after we find the aircraft. In other words, we know where it is, we know where the wreckage is, we found it, now what happens now, costing that. But in particular, I was fascinated with the priorities within that document. I suppose essentially the impression I got was, okay, we find the aircraft, it might not be plausible to literally, as you would in any other aircraft, essentially retrieve every single piece of the aircraft from the. We've seen that with how difficult that can be, particularly with Swiss Air Flight 111. You know, so there's a certain point that the logistics and costs of retrieving every single item. So I suppose the recovery document reflects these are our priorities. If we get there, if we find it, we start looking for this, and see how it progresses and see what it tells us. So not surprisingly, the data and cockpit recorder were one of the main priorities. All of the aviation electronics, and specifically from the MEC bay, were the next priority. After that, it was get the cockpit section. One of the other priorities was the cockpit door. One can ominously see where they were going with that, what they wanted to know. They clearly wanted to know, was it breached? Was it functioning correctly? I suppose sadly for and I'm always conscious of this for the next of kin and the families. Sadly and realistically, human remains were quite a way down the list, and I suppose that's more practically, how possible is it to repatriate the remains of people. So that's hard for the next of kin to understand why that was much lower on the priority list. But I suppose we're at this stage, and particularly now, 6 years on, the priority remains not just finding the aircraft, but when we do, finding out what happened. Because ultimately, that's what the aviation industry wants to know. That's what everybody wants some conclusion. And is there something that we can do to prevent this? Be it a nefarious act, or is there some bizarre technical failure on this aircraft, something that has occurred that has never happened before? Just your thoughts on that, because I want to talk about what are the plausible possibilities. We will touch more on social media and the rather insane and completely off the wall stuff that's come out over the last 6 years. But I initially want to focus on what the plausible possibilities are before we move on to discounting why some other theories are completely, and why the evidence tells us that it swings one way rather than the other way. Because I was very much, and as you well know, I'm always conscious of the next of kin. I'm not a person who points fingers and makes public accusations at anybody, be that just general incompetency or failings or nefarious acts. That's just not my way. But just if you could just talk to us why we need to more seriously consider nefarious actions, be it pilot or be it perhaps hijack.
Okay. My, if you like, road down the path was I've flown the antecedents of the 777. I've flown the 767 and the 747. And the 777 first flew in 1995. It was about 6 years after the 747-400 flew, and it came with quite a few improvements on the avionics side and all that sort of thing. And as I delved into what it looked as though had occurred, I realised I couldn't have done it. I could not have. If I was going to take over this aircraft, I could not have done it because I didn't know enough, even though I had all this flying on large Boeing jets. I didn't know enough about the 777 to be able to, if I was going to hijack it myself, to do it in that way. So the smoking gun, I think, is that there's a computer system on board. It's called the AIM system, and it's two independent computers. It's seated in different parts of the main equipment centre. It's the thing below the flight deck. Yeah, and in those two cabinets, they're identical, so they're mutually redundant. If one stops working, the other one just carries on. There's the ACARS system, which is the data link, and the central maintenance computer. And so if you go down the road of a major malfunction, you have to ask yourself, why was it not reported by these two systems? That's what happens. I'll give you an example from my own.
In other words, what you mean is there should have, if something of great significance failed, there should have been an immediate ACARS error message gone boom back to mass ops saying there's something seriously wrong here, something has failed.
If I could relate an incident I had about 18 months ago, I was flying back from Hawaii to Sydney and going around some storms, and for no reason, it was daytime, we were just visually navigating around these storms. All of a sudden the autopilot disconnected and the two flight management computers went blank, and they're sort of the heart of the nav system, so that's a bit of a concern. Also, the fact that the autopilot disconnected, Anyway, I was hand flying. We sorted it out. They came back. They resynchronized. We re-engaged the autopilot and continued on our way. But this was strange. I hadn't seen a dual FMC failure for 15 years. The technology had improved in that time. So I made a SATCOM call to our maintenance section, and they said, yes, we saw that. We're expecting a call from you. We don't think it's a problem. We've had a look at it already. And this was no more than 5 minutes after the event. So what had happened, a similar system on the 747 had recorded these failures. It's called a flight deck effect message, an FDE message. It's called a flight deck effect message. They're the ones that get sent. There are small subsystems which may go unserviceable during flight. They're not sent. They're all downloaded if they're not going to affect the next flight. But this is a flight deck effect one. So they knew about it within 2 seconds of it happening. And they were all primed and ready to go. So you have to ask yourself, why didn't that happen on Malaysian 370? And you come up with the answer that, okay, it's possible, I don't think it's probable, but it's possible that there was some major malfunction that took out those systems on both those computers, which is hard to believe, and also took out the VHF communication, because there was also no indication from the flight deck that they had a problem. So we recently had someone on the forum that we both attend, and he was saying that, and I've heard this before, that the crew oxygen bottle that gives oxygen to the flight deck crew in a depressurization or if a fumes event or something like that, that was near, it's sited near one of these AIMS computer cabinets. And
I think, just correct me if I'm wrong with the layout, I think there's AIMS left, AIMS right, but they're also juxtapositioned in a diagonal. Essentially, one is towards the front, the other is towards the rear. So if anything seriously fails in one area, this backup systems towards the rear take over.
Yeah, should just take over. In fact, it's not even a backup system. They both take turns in being the master system. So, and the oxygen bottle may have exploded and taken out all these systems. One of the pilots on my pilot's course in the Australian Air Force, a guy called John Bartels, and he was the captain on the Qantas 30 incident, which was a oxygen bottle explosion causing a depressurization. They were south of Hong Kong heading towards Melbourne, and they're about 250 miles northwest of Manila when this happened. And pretty much that's what happened to them. It knocked out some systems. It actually cut through some flight controls. The flight controls on the ailerons driven through the first officer's control wheel were cut. So the first officer couldn't turn left. He still could. He's on the left-hand side. Didn't knock out the radios, didn't knock out anything else, but it was a major incident. And the thing to note about it was the ATSB looked into the history of these things, and it was, as far as they could tell, it was the first time it had ever happened in the history of flying, which made it what I call these things black swan events. And so, yes, had it happened before? Yes. Had it happened more than once? No. They could never find the reason why this happened. It was, as far as they could tell, it was a normal oxygen bottle. It had been serviced not long before. There was absolutely no way to tell what had happened to it, because it had departed the aircraft, made a huge hole in the cargo compartment. Everyone thought it was a bomb initially, which it sort of is, really. It's a massive release of compressed air instantaneously, so it has the force of a small bomb. But that did not render the aircraft unflyable. The communication system still worked. The pilots did a fantastic job. I was on our Pilots Association at the time, and I got to write them up for an award with IFALPA, which is the International Federation of Airline Pilot Associations. And when I read through the report, they had their masks on. Well, they'd been sitting there just about to get a cup of coffee, and all of a sudden this occurred, massive explosion. The cabin altitude went to 25,000 feet instantaneously, or more or less. It was at 10,000 feet within 3 seconds. Within 8 seconds, it was at 25,000 feet. They were at 28,000 feet when this happened. They had their oxygen masks on within 20 seconds, and the whole thing, the oxygen mask on, and we had the checklist completed and were descending within 20 seconds of this happening. So they did a fantastic job, landed at Manila. It would take something like that. It would have to take something like that, and very specifically taking out both of the AIM's computers or the links between them. There are a multitude of that. And you would have to think plus the 3 VHF radios as well, and I find this unlikely. The other one that may have occurred is a depressurization, and for some reason the crew were unable to get their masks on quickly. That's a possibility. Once again, no messages were sent to warn of this. There would definitely be a cabin altitude warning sent, a flight deck effect message. That would have gone to Malaysian engineering. Nothing happened, no radios, and the aircraft appeared to be under control for at least while it was under radar, primary radar surveillance by the air traffic control system until it left radar. So that's hard to work out. It may have been a partial depressurization, it may have been hypoxic, but you have to ask, why were there no messages? Why were there no indication?
I guess having, and you know my position from very early on with this, I'm not somebody who instinctively wants to go to a nefarious reason. I try and eliminate absolutely everything else. And I think in general that's the way a safety investigation works. They don't want to think the unthinkable.
Yeah. Well, I'm actually with you. This is the last thing I actually want. This is if it was one of the pilots, that's the last thing that I want. But the choices are, it's either that or some mix of malfunctions that is very strange in the way it actually occurred.
And I think the road we've both gone down and explored, when we look at every possible avenue, massive power outage, decompression, I constantly find every time you go down a particular road that you want that road to continue on and go, maybe. But every time I go down a particular road, I keep hitting a brick wall that goes, no, but that couldn't be. If that happened, then that and that should have happened.
Yes.
And I suppose when we talk about the decompression and hypoxia, you then have to go, okay, but why did the aircraft make two? Understandably, the first turn perhaps is explainable when an event happens like that. Look, get down, get back home. But why do we have two subsequent turns of great significance?
Yes.
One completely moving away from home base, and then a second going completely nowhere.
That can, I guess, be explained by partial depressurization in the case of hypoxia, and this is one of the theories put forward, and that's possible. That is, but you have to remember that if you're partially hypoxic, you've got no oxygen. You don't have a mask on. If the oxygen cylinder itself exploded, that's the crew supply of oxygen gone, and the altitude profile that we think occurred after the turn places the aircraft at 35,000 feet initially. Your time of useful consciousness at that altitude is 30 seconds
to a minute.
30 seconds. To 45 seconds. And So, and what happens there is you don't become hypoxic. Your brain begins to die. You're hypoxic for that. You're beginning more and more hypoxic. I've done these chamber runs in the Air Force when I was being trained. They're an eye opener.
They're very scary and frightening experiences, I believe. Initially, a certain sense of euphoria, and then something doesn't feel right here without having the competency to put your finger on what's wrong with me.
That's the reason why you do them, because everyone's symptoms when they become hypoxic are different. Mine were very mild. I was a 20-year-old, quite fit, and I think I had a fairly good lung capacity. I'll relate the story that they would put us in these chambers. There were about 10 of us, and you're in two pairs, and there's a pair of you, and one of you would take off your mask. So take up, say, 24,000 feet, and they would take off your mask, and one would take off, the other one would watch him, and I took mine off first. And the drill is you have a clipboard and a pen, and you've got to count back from 100 to in some random sequence. I think by sixes or something like that. And you start off fine, and eventually you become hypoxic. You're not really aware of it, but your writing becomes strange, and your arithmetic goes out the window. And at some point, the instructor will tell you to put your mask back on, and the rush you get when you put the mask back on is something to behold. All of a sudden, your eyes clear and your head goes, wow, and you realise how hypoxic you were. My mate, when I did this, was a heavy smoker. He was the heaviest smoker I've ever met in my life, actually. And so time came for him to take off his mask. And the reason I bring this up is because both Zahari and Farik were...
I think they were both smokers.
They were both smokers. And he took his mask off, and instantly the eyes glazed over. They were told, start to do the thing, and nothing occurred. And eventually I had to do my job, was to watch him and put his mask back on, because there was no way he was going to do it. And we were only at 24,000 feet. And I talked to him afterwards, and I said, you didn't do much. He said, I don't remember a thing from the instant I took the mask off. So when you're at 35,000 feet, the effect is much more instantaneous. So it's possible, I'll give it that, but they would have to get their masks on almost instantaneously. And if there was no oxygen, then both of them are unconscious within half a minute, and dead within about 5. Yeah.
Okay, Michael. Let's move on now and talk just a little bit about the debris. Okay. Yeah. In summary, what do we know of the debris, and what does the debris tell us or indicate, or does it really tell us anything?
Well, if you believe the drift analysis, I guess it tells us that they were pretty close. But I think it's not a very exact science. So it tells us it wasn't in the South China Sea, and it wasn't in the Andaman Sea, where this thing came from, it, and it was in the vicinity of where they looked. And I think that's the main thing. But the fact that the biggest part they've found so far is the flaperon is interesting, and I know there's a controversy going on whether or not the aircraft ditched or not. It doesn't look to me like it ditched, but Larry Vance is pretty sure of it. But I think you can make a case both ways there. But it says that the initial theory, I guess, going into the southern Indian Ocean was broadly correct, but it wasn't good enough to let us know exactly where it is, or close enough to refine the search. I do find it interesting that some people say the aircraft ditched, but there was a piece of confirmed records that came from halfway up the tail, and I don't know how that happens in the ditching. So I just, I think it could be a ditching. I think it's much more likely if you think if you're going to ditch and it's an intentional ditching, you're consigning yourself to a slow, painful death.
Mm-hmm.
I think I definitely wouldn't do it that way.
Yeah, and I suppose the other thing with that's been noted from the debris that I find rather convincing is of the now obviously we have 30 pieces of debris. No one is suggesting that every piece of debris that's been found around the islands and the shores of East Africa is MH370 or is even a piece of aircraft, but rather we have, I think it's about half dozen, 7 pieces now that can reasonably be tied to specifically to flight MH370. Yes. And what's striking, bar the flaperon that was found on Reunion Island and the left outer flap, which was found in, yes, I think Tanzania, which I think is one of the most northern pieces that was found along that coast, is that the vast majority of pieces are highly fragmented.
Yes.
And yes, many of them lack the significant signs that you see with a ditching or a shall we say a more shallow angle of impact. In other words, there's, yes, a lack of what we call compression, where, yes, one piece of the aircraft goes forward and hits the next piece goes so, and there's a distinct lack of that in an awful lot of the fragments, and of course they're highly small and fragmented. So yes, my take from that is it's some extraordinary coincidence that of all the pieces that we found, we just happen to have found all the smaller pieces, which I find slightly extraordinary. Yes. So yes, that tells me that whatever other pieces that are out there or didn't make it across the Indian Ocean and eventually sunk, or for whatever reason we haven't found them, but there's more of a chance that the rest of them are also highly fragmented, which tends to indicate quite a violent catastrophic impact.
I agree. I was having a look today at the Boeing 767 ditching the Ethiopian Airlines.
Right, yeah. Which a lot of people bring up when we talk about the case of a possible ditching for MH370. It's an interesting case to look at. Not the only one.
Yes, it's very. They were doing it under a lot of duress. The captain was actually being beaten about the head by one of the hijackers as he tried to put this aircraft down. They didn't have full flap down, so it touched down at quite a fast speed, and broke up. Yes, it did break up, but it broke up into large pieces. So I think you've got a very valid point there. I think the flaperon where it is, it's shielded by the wing, shielded by the engine itself, so that would probably protect it from a lot of the impact forces and high-speed impact. But I would definitely say I agree with you there.
And what I suppose what struck me about the flaperon was, if people obviously were on a radio broadcast essentially, and we don't have the images of it, but if people can see those very characteristic and distinct images of the flaperon being carried by the police on Reunion Island, take a look at it again and you'll notice one very distinct thing, and it goes back to this idea of compression. The flaperon essentially, I suppose, side on, looks slightly like a sort of slight triangular tapered shape and is rounded then towards. The rounded is what we call the leading edge, and that effectively sits into the wing, and it pivots on the wing, if you like, up and down. It doesn't retract like flaps. And on an impact, a very violent impact, what you should see is some form of compression or crushing towards the front, where it's gone forward with momentum. And I don't see that on the flaperon. In fact, I see an extraordinarily intact flaperon, even for a very violent incident. And I've always, and I am not suggesting this, I simply have an open mind on it, and I've often asked myself, is it entirely out of the question that the reason why we have, and the only two significant large pieces we found, is because those pieces were not attached to the aircraft at point of impact.
That they may have fallen off during a high-speed dive or something like that is well, that's definitely a possibility there. I know when they did the simulated tests regarding the end of flight and the phugoid motion, the up and down oscillations that came up as a part of that, they said the aircraft went through what's called design dive speed, which is the theoretical. Well, it's not even a theory. It's the fastest that a test pilot would fly the aircraft to. It's much faster than the maximum operating speed, and they said it went past there. So you're starting to get into the realms of flutter, which is aeroelastic stretching of the wing, and that would definitely cause a flaperon to possibly separate in flight.
Essentially, a failure of it, where it literally detaches. Yeah. Before we move on as to how this case has been treated, both by the official investigation teams, the independent teams, and generally more broadly treated by the general public who have an interest in it. I suppose, and I'll be honest with you, as cruel as it may sound, I have heard, and I can understand where people are coming from. I have heard the argument, look, they've spent nearly 180 million on this. They can't find it. The possibilities of finding it are not so much remote, but perhaps technically we're just not at the advanced stage to be able to finite all the data we have and actually find that credible area where it could be. Why don't we just put this one down to, we may never know, and let's just stop looking and let's just learn our lessons about, tracking aircraft and make sure this doesn't happen again. What are your views on that? I mean, essentially my view on that is, okay, I understand the point, but that isn't good enough in any air accident. One, for the next of kin who need some form of answers, and two, God forbid, if this really is not a nefarious act but something unusual, or what we call our black swan, has happened, we need to know about that. We need to know why that happened.
Yeah, I agree 100%. I think I would personally like to see them search past the arcs. Sorry. I think a lot of the pilots involved, particularly in the 60 Minutes Australia show that featured this, were of the opinion that the uncontrolled flight is may not be the way it actually occurred, and the ATSB did seem very need to be a large search. I think you search a 140 mile square box at past the arc. That would be all that you would need to do to either rule that in or rule that out. And if someone comes up with a better route that may have been taken, and I want to mention the IG, the independent group here, they came up recently with another track which has the impact point further northeast of where they searched, and it's got a lot going for it. I think it's
they seem to be honing in on an area around, I think it's 34.2 south, which is obviously on our longitude and latitudes.
Yes. I'd tell you the reason why I do find it a rather compelling flight path is that I've always thought the great weakness of the rogue pilot theory was that the turn to the north of Sumatra would have been picked up by Indonesian air defence radars,
who claimed they saw nothing or picked up nothing.
Well, they were probably turned off, but if it was a rogue pilot, they would have no way of knowing that.
Mm-hmm.
And so you would have to plan to go a certain distance past Sumatra, quite a distance away, probably about 250 miles, and adjust your flight path to maintain the distance. And so I thought that was a great weakness. But they've worked on a descent after the loss of radar returns in the north of the Malacca Strait. And what's interesting about that, they've got the aircraft descending down to 5,000 feet. It roughly coincides with the alleged sighting by KTT. He said about that time and about that spot, she said she saw an aircraft flying at low altitude. Of course, the weakness of her description is that she said it was glowing orange at the time, which doesn't really make a lot of sense. However, I know the members of the IG group have remarked upon this, and then it reached a waypoint and just turned due south, which is very easy to program into the flight management computer. So that, as you say, that brings the impact point up there. So I would, if I was going to, I had a couple of spare tens of million, I would get Ocean Infinity to search the 100-mile box past those 2 points. And if you can't find it there, well, you may have to go to plan A, just say, well, we just don't know. But I think there is a lot to be learned from finding the wreckage and, as I said, finding the flight recorders.
I want to talk a little bit wider about the impact of the media. Obviously, we're talking about MH370, but I often, in forums with people with a general interest in aviation, I get this all the time. People say to me, "Geez, Mick, you're big into aviation. What's going on with the industry? Why are we having all these crashes?" And I say, actually, that's not the case. What's happening? What is occurring is we live in a social media world. We are all so much more cued into media and where we get our information from. And there's actually accidents of varying kinds, minor incidents, major incidents, happening every day. Like there's rarely one day passes where a small Cessna somewhere hasn't gone missing or crashed in a desert or crashed in the sea or helicopter. We're just hearing about these incidences, and the focus of the population across the world is just more interested, and we're hearing more information about this. It's not that the industry has suddenly become unsafe or there's more accidents happening. If anything, we've gone quite the opposite way in recent years.
Yeah, exactly right. I think, and we see it quite often with the number of articles being put out there by certain tabloid newspapers, particularly in the UK.
Yeah, our friends from News Corp with their the Daily Fail, as they call it, the
Daily Fail,
Daily Mail, the Daily Star, the Express, and all their groups in Australia as well.
And that's just clickbait. That's all that is. It's still, because this is the greatest mystery in the aviation industry ever, and because people want to know, they realise this, and it's clickbait. But and it gives the impression that A, more is happening, but B, when they go on to other incidents too, that is happening all the time. When I think it was 2017, we didn't have a single accident of any major import, which was quite amazing. If you go back and look at the stats, as I say, back in the 60s or 70s or even the 80s, it was happening every couple of weeks. But the improvements we discussed when we began here have gone a long way, and just the knowledge of how to build aircraft, how to build systems, how to build safety systems, how to navigate accurately have been fantastic. And it's I think we need to concentrate on that more than the occasional accident that happened, notwithstanding the things that happened, say, with the 737 MAX and all that sort of thing. I think that was quite that was a tragedy. And wholly avoidable, and I think Boeing has a lot to answer for there. But it's very much a safer industry than it was and will continue to improve. I often get inquiries from friends of mine who've booked on what I might consider a bit of a dodgy airline, and they'll say, "What do you think about that?" And I don't say anything. I'll just say, I'll point them to the Flight Radar 24 main screen where they show every aircraft that's
currently in the air.
And I say, statistically, you will make it, and that's true. Even with some of the more dodgy airlines around, statistically, you'll still make it. A lot of that's due to the advances that have been made in aircraft design, air traffic control, and pilot training.
I suppose, again, generally talking about the media input into this, I suppose there are. I want to revisit and conclude on MH370, but let's just talk a little bit more about the social media aspect.
Yeah.
I feel it's both positive and negative, and when I reflect back to the early days, to 2014 and March and April 2014, I've always had a mixed, I suppose, reflection on the Tomnod project, and just for people who go, okay, what the hell's Tomnod? Or basically, it captures, sells, buys satellite images. Would I be correct in, referring to it in that manner? Explain to people what Tomnod is, and then I'll talk a little bit about the project itself, which we heard an awful lot about in March and April 2014.
Basically, it was a satellite surveillance system, wasn't it? As far as which could focus cameras on the sea and picked up what looked to be debris fields, and by using just ordinary people, they could be assigned to look at thousands and thousands of these photographs that were done of the sea surface, and were picking up what appeared to be debris fields. And
essentially, I suppose Tomnod was working with its one of its satellite partners, a company called Digital Global, capturing all these images, and essentially thought, we can maybe help the initial SAR, which was the search and rescue, when initially they were looking for the aircraft. And they thought, why don't we use ordinary people, crowdsourcing, because clearly the investigation teams don't have the capacity, because analyzing satellite images, yes, you can do it with software and analyze it that way, but ultimately the best way is with eyes on it, knowing what you're looking for. So
nothing
Tomnod came up with this
cognitive abilities. Yeah, nothing beats the cognitive abilities of the human eye.
My opinion on that project was, I thought it was great for the first 3 or 4 weeks, but and I'm reflecting now on social media, it started to initially give me all the signs that I think is now awful about social media when it's involved and interested in MH370. Initially, it was a great idea. It started off, but slowly but surely, and I think this is why Tomnod shut the project down. I don't think there was any nefarious or bad reasons to. I just think they went, look, maybe we're better leaving this to the experts. This is starting to get a bit ridiculous. We're being inundated with people sending us images of things that look like the shape of a plane, on a satellite picture, which are clouds, which are,
waves,
sea formation, wave crests. And I think the project just got a little bit out of hand with Tomnod, and it created whole masses of groups of people who really, with the best intentions in the world, were completely out of their depth at what they were doing. And it would actually create, I remember talking to, I won't name the person, from the senior person in the ATSB, and I remember asking him, how are things going? And I mentioned Tomnod, and I remember him saying to me, Mick, it's just, we're overwhelmed with the help that people want to give us, but we're getting to a stage now where, instead of recruiting people from other departments on this project. We're having to recruit people in to deal with the inundation of emails because we have to follow through everything. And he told me, well, I'm beginning to realize I'm putting people in all the wrong places. We're involved in a SAR operation, and we need to concentrate all our resources on the information and data coming back from that, not go chasing, something off an island in Fiji, or something off the coast of Canada that might be a pain in the water. And he said, we're getting inundated, and all the people are going in the wrong areas. And it was the first signs to me where I thought, the longer this goes on, this is going to go more and more pear-shaped with the involvement of people. And I remember reaching out to a British satellite expert, and I mentioned the Tom project to him. I said, I'm well aware of it. Every second email I get now is either from a newspaper phoning me up to give them some opinion about MH370, or I'm being asked about my expert opinion on using satellites to try and find floating debris. And I said, well, are you as concerned about the project as I am? And he says, yes, because I've spent 7 years training as a satellite. I work on military contracts, I work on civil contracts. It takes 7 years, and you can't just look at an image on a site like Digital Global or Google Earth unless you have the correct software and you also are sourcing the raw image itself. You're not just looking at something on a screen, because you can look at something on a screen and zoom in, but unless you're looking at the raw image, you're just zooming into the pixels on a screen, and you're distorting. And it just reflected on me, which completely got out of hand, where we're now onto, and this is an area both myself and yourself seem to spend more of our time, and probably too much of our time now on, and this is debunking non-crap, utter garbage. People who are just out with the fairies, who don't understand aviation, they don't understand how a 777 works, how it's wired up, how it functions. They don't understand cockpit management. They don't understand how pilots work. They have vast ideas and conspiracies, and they don't do what investigators have to do due diligence. And constantly I hear, well, why don't they go and look there, or why don't they investigate that? I go, because of this, and this tells them that it can't be that, or it can't be there. And we just can't grasp that concept. As this certain person at the ATS told me, Mick, if we searched everywhere that people say we should search, we'd be searching the four corners of the world, and we wouldn't find MH370 for 100 years, if even then. And that's the problem. And just your thoughts on that.
Well, this is the thrust of the book that I'm going to write. I didn't mention it before, but I spent a lot of time on the Metabunk forum, which is run by a guy called Mick West, who's a very smart guy and a professional skeptic, I guess you'd call him. And I initially got involved because we were having threats made against Qantas pilots, who some people, deluded souls, believed that they were spraying chemtrails over their house and all this sort of thing, and they were beginning to make threats against the pilots. So sort of got involved, but it became a bit of an education for me as well, because I learned that nothing, when you're explaining something to someone who doesn't understand this sort of thing, you've got all this very basic language, and you must use facts. You can't use your own opinion. It grounded me in a way which I think will come through in this book I'm writing. Is that the main thrust of this book that I'm writing will be debunking a lot of these sorts of things. In the same way, I actually did it myself, because I didn't know what had occurred, and then realising that I didn't have the knowledge, if it was a rogue pilot, to do that myself. I had to find out a lot of things about the aircraft that I wasn't sure of, and I've got a lot of information on the 777, and I'm always looking for more, because I can never get enough facts. But this is I guess the one upside of the social media side of things is occasionally someone will say something or suggest something that you haven't thought of before, and you go, okay.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, that's
interesting.
Yeah.
And it may be someone who knows a bit about it, and go, and that's, for me, it makes it worthwhile. You and I sit through a lot of dross, and it's unfortunate, but that's sometimes what you've got to do, to find that one nugget of truth that will help you understand how the whole thing went down and how most things went down. I ended up debunking 9/11 conspiracy theories and, as I said, chemtrails and flat earthers, which you shouldn't have to debunk because it's so ridiculous, but it's apparently catching on. So, and I learned that nothing beats examples from my own flying career. I think that's probably the best I can put my thoughts down, and that would be the thrust of what I'm about to write, or what I am writing.
I suppose the question that we all know there's been quite a number of books, more than I care to remember.
Yeah, but
I know.
50, I think. Yeah.
Yes, I know David Sushi's book I thought was an excellent book, part memoir but also part reflective of the case of MH. That's quite a number of years back now, about 3 years back. Surprisingly, although he can irritate me at times on the television, but he's an exceptionally clever, intelligent man. And I thought Richard Quest's book was exceptionally good and well worth a read, because it touched on some of the areas that we've just talked about. It took the case of MH370 through the lens of the media and his experience of this bizarre, mysterious case through the lens of the media. But he always retained a grounding in the facts that were of the time. And it's a fascinating read as to how the media deals with an event like this and how the public receive it.
Yes, and you can tell the ones who know what they're talking about, and you I class as one of those, but then the ones who have no idea, which is painful, just make error after error. A journalist who can explain these concepts are very rare. They're actually very rare. But I'm not sure if I read Richard's one. I've got access to quite a lot of them, but and I can see why him explaining it in the terms of a journalist would be interesting to hear. I mean, there have been one or two done by pilots, airline pilots. James Nixon's one was one I read. I was a little bit disappointed in that, because he did make some fundamental mistakes in that, particularly with regard to depressurizations and oxygen supply and all that sort of thing, which I'll touch on in the book. But I know what he was trying to do. He was trying to he was writing it for Captain Zahari's sister, I believe, to find a way that explained it all. But I think he fell down in a couple of very.
And incidentally, if people want to know more about James's book, obviously they can check it out online. But equally, we talked to James on this program a couple of times, so people can go back on the previous podcasts and they can find out a little bit more about James. I suppose my question to you, when it comes to books and on that subject, I've as a journalist, I've considered it, but I've always went no, because it's like writing a novel or planning a novel, and to a degree you never know quite where it's going to go or how it's going to end. And in a sense, I suppose that's where I am with the case of MH370. So my question will be, why you write a book when we don't know the ending?
I believe I do know and I believe I can make a good case for it. And I'll be using incidents, episodes, big notes from my own career to highlight the points. I think that's probably the point of difference. The working title is MH370 Debunked, and it basically will show the process I went through to come to the fairly strong conclusion that there's only one real answer to this, and that's the point that I'm going down. I haven't really seen one like that. There may be another one out there, but it's basically having a look at what really couldn't happen, what's probable and what's improbable and what's highly improbable, and basically in simple enough language that the average person can get a sense of why I and a lot of other pilots, not all. I saw Yuanda in one of the podcasts. He's not convinced at all. So no, which is good. We need dissenting voices. We need it's in fact he's an interesting case. He's put in a lot of work himself, and I quite enjoyed the podcast that you did with him. But most of the people I talked to, and I did a lot of this talking to them on flight decks, you'd be going across the Pacific at midnight, and it was always a subject you could readily introduce to get a lively discussion, and a lot from that as well. But I would say 85% of the pilots I talk to agree with me. Whether or not they know why they agree with me or not, I don't know, but they seem to think it's the most likely thing. So that's my point of view and how I'll be attacking it.
I suppose we'll be moving now to the final thoughts as we conclude the podcast. Obviously, what are your hopes with the next of kin in mind? We're coming up to the 6th anniversary in some weeks' time. Literally, about 4 weeks' time.
Yep.
The 6th anniversary, I think, where families will come together in Kuala Lumpur. And clearly they'll be calling once again for a renewed search,
which I think is their role. I really hope they do, and I think once the IG group releases its new report on the route that they've identified, I think they should really pressure.
Yeah, they've released a summary essentially of the findings,
Yes.
but they haven't released the core data in the report. I believe that's hopefully just a few weeks away. And I know Victor Arnello has made it very clear, because just in the recent week we've had an awful lot of stories flying around about, there's a brand new search imminent, which I can categorically tell you is absolutely not the case.
Yeah.
What has occurred there is that during 2018 the IG was approached by Ocean Infinity and asked for, is there any update on your own analysis? And they weren't the only group. They did approach other groups as well. And they asked, please, can you give us some kind of feedback before January? That was done. They're still waiting for a full report. So if we do get a new search, really there's two things that have to happen. The most important thing, I think, is there has to be more finite and credible reasons to convince the Malaysian government to once again fund a potential search. And secondly, it's an operational thing as well. You can't just take on these searches just at the drop of a hat and sail into the sunset on your boat with your equipment. These things take planning and structures and organizations, and that takes months. So we're well, anybody who has any fantasy that there's going to be a search in the next few weeks or months, forget it. It's not going to happen. Yeah. We're really looking and planning at probably later this year, when the season reopens again, late 2020, maybe October, November, December, into January, February, March of 2021, and that's even if you can get the agreement of the Malaysian government, because I don't think anybody is going to go to the cost and risk of failure in another search unless they feel it's credible, at least as credible as before, if not more credible now.
Yeah. Well, that will be very interesting. I really don't know what they can do to come up with something like that, because unless they've done some more research in redefining the BTO and BFO values, and they've come up with a higher degree of certainty that this the first search area was the right one, or this new one may be the place to look. I just find it a stretch. I just can't see how they're going to get over that hump myself. But I think that's the role of the families, is saying we need to have one more look. I think, I think we need to go past the arc. I think that this just keeping it on the seventh arc is not the way that they're going to find it, and they've pretty much proved that because they've searched most of it and found nothing. So yeah, hopefully there'll be some pressure applied, but I'm with you. I have my doubts. I think I'd be actually surprised if it happens. I'd be pleasantly surprised, but I'd be surprised if it happens.
Yeah, I think as I always say to people, Malaysia has set the bar in that critical sentence, credible evidence leading to a more precise location. That has set the bar so incredibly high for any operational search to meet, and that's the difficulty.
Yeah, which is why I have my doubts. I just can't see what it would be. Yeah.
Michael, obviously you're working away on the book. Any other plans?
I'm about to become a grandfather for the first time.
Oh, well, congratulations. Is that weeks away, days away?
It's in May, so that's fantastic. It'll be my wife and I's first grandchild. So I'm working on getting my pilot license back. Hopefully that'll happen in the next 6 weeks or so, in which case I still do some flying. I fly the Caribou, which I flew in the Air Force down at we have a flying museum down in south of Sydney that exists solely to keep these old aircraft flying, and that's just a huge amount of fun and something I never actually dreamed I'd get to do again. And plus I'm active member of a formation aerobatic team. I do the ground stuff, the commentating and support and all that sort of thing. So between all that, I'm pretty busy than writing the book. So yeah, no, life is good.
Lots of things on the horizon. Michael, Glynn, it's been a pleasure talking to you today. Let's hope we have more positive news at some stage throughout 2020, whether it's to do with a new search or we know a tiny bit more, but we can only be hopeful at this stage.
I hope so.
And thank you for joining me. You're very welcome. Take care, Michael.
Bye-bye.
Okay, thanks once again to Michael for joining us as a guest. Always delighted. What I am going to do is I have just recently in the last few days had a couple of statements in the media from both Ocean Infinity and the Malaysian Ministry of Transport, and I'm going to make them available here in this final segment so you can read them. Just a summary as regards the search and the position of both parties. Again, we're on social media, Facebook and Twitter at Radio Espial, www.radioespial.com. You can find out about forthcoming programs coming up in the next few weeks or months. Thank you again for joining us. I hope you join us again. This podcast, as I say, will be available on YouTube, other iPod channels, including Spreaker, iTunes, SoundCloud, and we more recently, towards the end of last year, were available on Spotify. So again, wherever you're going, give us a like, and we'll stay tuned, and hopefully it won't be quite so long for episode 13 next time around. Take care.